Welcome. In this short video, we're going to take a look at how to add in a line boil effect to our rig. So sometimes when we draw with our rigs, we just use a standard clean vector line. And if we want to add in a line boil effect, we can use different turbulence nodes and things like that. But Harmony has now included a new node that can help us do this, which is the Animate Pencil Texture node right here. So what this node does is it will animate a pencil texture. So I have my artwork set up where I have my line art on my line art layer, my color on my color. That's all good, but the one thing I don't have is I don't have a texture. I'm using the standard vector line. So what I'm going to do is just go into my rig here and I will just select any of my layers. I'll zoom out and now select everything. So I've turned on select all visible drawing layers so I can multi-select all the lines in one shot. And once I've done that, and again I'm using my select tool, I'm not using my animation tool, and currently there is no texture, so the animate texture node is not going to do anything. So what I want to do is choose a texture that I like here, and once I have that, so if I choose a texture like that, we can now see how the line, if we go from none, we can go into rough, I can go, so we have lots of different options of kinds of lines to choose. And it's going to really depend. So now if we look at it and see if we like that kind of texture, that's great. But if we want something else or something more dramatic or different, which I'm not really a fan of that bumpy one. Let's see, wavy thick, what's that look like? No, that could be kind of interesting while it's animating. We'll change out our texture a few times and see what happens when we do it. I'm kind of partial to using charcoal on this, and we can look at our texture, and currently my line size is 2.5, so it is a little bit small, but we're going to see how this plays out. So I'll just set my artwork here close enough so we're zoomed in at 250% so the line is a little bit bigger so we can see it. And now if I exit out of my character and look at the animate texture node, we can't really see it until we switch into my preview, but I also will have to take and extend out the exposure for my layers. We'll extend that out. And now if I go through individual frames, we can see there is a slight change happening, but it's very subtle. Now there is another node we can use that we don't have to switch into our render preview node that can't, or our render view node, and it's called render preview. So now if I go and choose my render preview node here, and I'm just going to pull that out. I like to just bury it right before display as an option. Now we'll see in the timeline with this render preview that is happening is if I scrub the timeline, we can see how now those frames are starting to fill. So by scrubbing it, it turns them yellow and then it's going to fill them. Now what we also see is the Animate Pencil Texture. We can see where it's doing every 2 frames something is animating. But now that my render preview is full, I can hit the space bar because I've set the keyboard shortcut so space bar is play. Now we can see the line boil effect happening. I zoom out a little bit and it's pretty subtle. So what I might want to do is I can vary that. I can vary it by changing my texture, but it does start to look a little bit more like actual. And if we go and choose 100% for the artwork here, it starts to look like actual hand-drawn animation where we just have those subtle differences happening. But if we go into the node, we can adjust it. Right now it's going for a minimum of 0.3, so if I want to maybe even go 0.1 there, and now we'll go 0.3, 3.5, and we can see where it now flushed it. Now I can start to see there's a lot more shimmer happening, especially if I zoom in a little bit. So if our artwork were to be scaled up as the character is on frame here, so we can see there is our view. So if it were to scale it up at any point in the scene, we would start to see how we're getting that boiling texture happening. Now I'm going to stop that for a moment. Go back here, select, zoom out so I can select everything. And let's choose a different texture. So let me just try that wavy texture and see what that looks like here. So scrub through. So we're getting some texture happening with it. Now, of course, if I start out with a bigger line to begin with, so if my line isn't 2.5, but if we scale it up to, we'll just say 5, so it's now a much heavier line. And I'm going to choose stringy soft. So the first playthrough, we can see where it's caching it. Now it turned it all green. So now I can. So we can see how that probably is not great, but we definitely have a lot more movement happening with the line. So this is a different visual effect than using the different turbulence options for creating a line boil effect. It's going to be significantly more subtle in its appearance, but we can further create more adjustments on it. So just varying the thin and thickness on it, that allows us to make some changes. But if I go and change it back to charcoal, which is generally going to be my preferred option. Now we did make the line bigger here. One thing that we could see as part of this, now if we cache those in here, so it starts to have just that subtle shimmery effect. If we want to make it really dramatic, I'm going to go way too far. So my advice when you're trying to play with the different settings and figuring out what gives you the best option is to adjust with very large changes first. And then after you've made very large changes. So we can see now by changing the offset, it's really, the line is really wavering. Now we probably would want to adjust the segment length if we did that, so then it would do it, but we can see that going from a 0.25 to a 1.25 and it's negative is probably too much, but maybe if we just go 0.55 and see what happens with that. We can see that starts to look a little bit better. So we have a little bit of wiggle going on, especially if I am at 100%. So when our view is at our normal 100%. So if we say at 100%, get a little bit of movement. It's not super active. Where two lines are tight together, like around the hands or in the eyes, we can see more things happening. But now if this character is moving around on screen, it's going to be a little bit less apparent because you won't be able to just stare at it and see it kind of boil and shimmer. So using this can be a great way of working with it, and using the render preview node can be useful to see things. So when you start applying effects into your scene, this can be a faster way of seeing how it's working versus clicking over, advancing to a particular frame, and instead just using it here. But I do recommend while you're working is disconnect it when you don't actually need to see it, because it really slows down everything while you're working and when you're testing for movement and animation. So good luck and happy animating.